Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to our webinar today. I'm Louise from BIMA. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we will be hearing from a brilliant panel of guests about the importance of positive male role models. For those of you that are new to BIMA, BIMA is the British Interactive Media Association, and for the last 40 years, we've been representing the creative, tech and digital industry. BIMA is a trade association with 350 or so members. We're a not-for-profit and do a range of things like awards, events, training, mentoring, and all sorts of ways in which we try and help people get into and stay into the industry. Now, as tomorrow is International Men's Day, we wanted to make sure we shone a light on a really important issue. Ever since adolescence, the national conversation has looked at young men and how we need to make sure there is a focus on positive male role models. We've probably all also watched the new John Lewis advert where the focus was a teenage boy and his dad, so it seems really timely. Something to note, today's session is an all-male panel, and this isn't an oversight, it's a deliberate and conscious decision. But it was interesting that all the guys on the panel queried this, and I think that shows a great consideration and sensitivity. No complaints, please. Look, this is a SHIMA-run initiative, so where we've primarily focused on women, we want to hear from men on this issue and how these men can, will, and do support and help the younger generation. I've been thrilled to work with Ian, or Prez, as I'm sure he'll introduce himself on this. So I'll hand over to him now. But remember, it's a webinar, so we can't see you, but please use the chat box and QA function throughout. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you for setting us up there, Louise. And thank you, everybody who's joining me today. My name is Ian Preston. I am part of the SHIMA steering group, as well as some other activities with BIMA. I'm also, I describe myself as a beloved dad and dog father. So I've got two not so furry sons and two furry sons in my household. And today I'm really delighted and very honoured, frankly, to be able to put together this panel on behalf of SHIMA. On this really important and current topic today. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction to the panel in my own words, and as we get around the questions, I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves as we move into the first questions as well. But I thought it was really important for our audience to understand why we've curated the panel in the way that we have. And I think we can all recognise that sporting figures are presented through every walk of life as important examples of role models at a societal level. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are people whom we encounter through sport that are not at that elite level, perhaps, but play equally, if not more important roles in the lives of young people and setting positive examples for them every day. So I wanted to ensure that we represented that, and I think brilliantly to my right, Lee, as the founder of the Brentford Community Sports Trust, and Modi from their backgrounds, and Modi working in social services through his career and beginning as a youth worker, give us a really fantastic lens onto that. And right on cue, as I just finished mentioning elite sport, Zach has joined us from California, because I think although the aperture is often placed firmly on and particularly in recently with the comments from Gareth Southgate and so on around the need for positive role models, a lot of focus in our culture in the UK is around football, right? It's considered our national sport, and therefore a huge focus there. But I think it's fair to say that anybody who's in the public eye with a sporting lens now feels that responsibility and that pressure around that role model position. And so I'm really delighted that Zach's able to join us from training camp in California, where it is just gone 6 a.m, I believe. So thank you, Zach, for joining us. And his perspective on growing up and his experience as an elite athlete, but what that additional kind of factor means as a role model. And then finally, I'm joined by Steve as well. And Steve's background as a creative director is really important in this conversation, because his role for many years has been around connecting brands in culture and really understanding authenticity, where it represents itself and what that means, and how that's changed and evolved as well. But also, being a single dad, he's raising two kids, and with his new partner as well. So his lens on actually what that means from a very primary sense of parenting is really important to our panel. So without further ado, I thought that was hopefully a helpful setup for everybody. I'm going to move into my questions now. So this is a question for our whole panel, but beginning with Modi. First of all, I've been a student mentor at a school in London called Lillian Baylis. I was introduced to the school by a friend of mine who's now the head teacher to come in and talk about my experience growing up with ADHD and what that meant through education and through going into my career space. What I didn't anticipate, though, was having worked with the school for a couple of years, going in an informal capacity, running sessions. I didn't anticipate an email I received from the head. When I got it, I initially thought, "Oh my God, did I drop an F-bomb?" Yeah, exactly. Did I drop an F-bomb in my last session with the group? What happened? And it happened that the head teacher was passing on a message from a parent couple, a same-sex couple, who had made the observation about their son that he was lacking a male role model in his day-to-day life, and would I be that male role model? Now, it came as a surprise. It also came as a great privilege to be asked for that. And it also made me step back, right, and think about that, because I'd never, ever thought about or framed myself through that lens. And yet there was a young man and his parents who had decided that I could be somebody who could play that role for him. So I want to start us on a really positive note, because that's been a brilliant experience for me. It was very unexpected, but I really embraced it, and I'm really delighted that it's happened. So for yourselves and your professional and personal lives, and beginning with you, Modi, what are the positive things that you've been seeing that really hearten you around this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I've been thinking about this question really over the weekend, and thinking about sort of what role models look like, and to sort of answer this question, sort of reflecting my own experience of sort of growing up and thinking about who influenced me and who were kind of role models for me. So lots of my sort of role model early life started with sort of school. So there were two PE teachers who were there for me when I was in school, who had my back. They were there when I was okay in school. I sort of struggled a little bit, but I had sort of teachers, regardless of what I did in school, believed in me, had my back, were consistent. Then I sort of translate that to my professional life when I went into the youth work. I've run youth services, and I'm no longer doing that. But I think for me, those sort of experiences with those teachers fed how I worked in youth services. Again, really around thinking about being consistent. When we're thinking about sort of role models and components of role models, it's you pick up lots of different things from different people to build your shape of what a role model looks like. So for me, we had those PE teachers, early experiences of them, and sort of believing me and being consistent. Then sort of growing up, as a black male, we had sort of sporting stars. So growing up in Thierry Henry, we had Linford Christie, so we had sort of sporting element, sports stars, where we sort of looked at in terms of role models. And I grew up in a period when African kids, such as myself, pretended we weren't African. We were all pretending we were all from the Caribbean, because of sort of the athletes we had at the time during the Olympics who were representing England. They were all from that part of the world, so we were all pretending to not be African anymore. But that's changed, and I think for me that sort of feeds into what sort of changed now, that you have lots more young people who are really proud of their heritage, proud of their background. And you can see that in terms of our sporting stars as well, in terms of not everyone from the global majority is of Caribbean heritage, but you see lots more stars in being from the African background. So for me, what's shifted in terms of the conversation around sort of role models is the same component around actually someone who believes in you. That's from people who you can see. So from teachers as role models, youth workers. So for me, definitely when I went into youth work, was very much being mindful of actually, I am a male, I'm from an African background, and these young people sort of looking at me for sort of guidance and influence in the decisions I make. So I made sure I led on sessions with young people around sort of cooking, so making sure sort of dispelling some of those myths around sort of men cooking. So I made sure in those sessions, normalizing it. So I did lots of the cooking with young men, and so recognizing some of the young men that we work with and young people in general, that sort of cooking experience was new because of so many parents just trying to struggle to be a parent without thinking about all the other things you have to battle with. So for me, it was definitely, as a role model, is holding all of those experiences, ensuring normalizing behavior, normalizing emotions. So for me, in my youth work history, you would have seen, people would have seen me sort of cry when I'm hearing some of their stories. So normalizing those sort of emotions as well. So for me, what's changed, it's a lot more in terms of online. So you're seeing young men getting the influences from sort of online influences. But I think there's something still true on sort of those everyday normal experiences from everyday people, from youth workers, teachers, and caregivers as well. So that consistency, having people's back. So for me, those are sort of the components when I'm thinking about sort of male role models. And even when we were having this conversation, it's when I think of my own experiences, you pick bits and pieces from different people and try and build your ideal role model. So for me, I think things have moved on. We're a lot more comfortable about what our role models look like, and they're not always male. And I think we've had this conversation as well in terms of actually when we're thinking about it. So my role models, my mum was a role model to me. And the teachers I described at the beginning were both two female PE teachers at school as well. So to sort of shape who I am as a male and what that looks like, it's definitely taking components from lots of different people to try and build one image of what role model looks like. And I've always carried that in my working life.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bodie. Lee, I'd love to hear your reflections as well. Some of those positive examples that you see.
We see them every day and more. We've got 160 staff and volunteers here now at the Trust. And what we found is that a lot of our participants have stayed with us and are now coaches and mentors. And they are authentic coaches and mentors, and they operate in communities they grew up in, and they reflect the values of the Trust, but actually deeper, the way they are as people reflects in the participants. And there's thousands of participants, and those participants sometimes come from communities that really do lack resources, where we can try and give opportunities or provide opportunities and provide support as well. There was a story quite a while back before we even started the Trust, and we built this really big tour up over a long period of time where we had hundreds of people going, parents and children, and actually young adults by the time we finished. So we had some of our participants that were 15, 16 years old. And we loved it as a group. It brought everybody together, and you get to see lots of different sides of people when you see them in different environments. But right at the end of the tour, a mum called me over and said, "This is wonderful." And I said, "That's fantastic, isn't it?" No, she said, "Really, this is wonderful. What's happening is actually what you don't realise is some of your coaches are male role models for some of those young people that haven't necessarily got them in their lives." I mean, this is quite a long way back, and you think, so what's really important is clearly as a Trust, and that people are authentic and they do instill the right values, but they do that naturally by, I suppose, the people they are. And more recently, what was really interesting, I was in an event last night to celebrate 15 years of the Premier League. And Premier League, if you know the history, there's been a massive investment over a long period of time into communities through organisations such as ours. And we were lucky enough last night to represent through one of our projects. And we had 4 young men that actually took the stage and spoke. And they were led by one of our female coaches and mentors. And they all reflected on, I'll name the coach because I think she absolutely deserves credit, Jane, the effect she had had on their lives, and I think that's the point, and the point that Modi makes is actually we're shaped by a number of role models, and it's so important to have that balance. So I think as an organisation we try and be progressive, but your people reflect who you are and who your values are, just like any other organisation. But it's probably in our case, every single day, those people going out and being the consistent person in those communities, and that makes a massive difference.
Brilliant, thank you. Zach, can you hear us there in Cali?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Amazing, you're coming through loud and clear. So the transatlantic link is working, at least we know that. But welcome. Just love to hear your reflections well on that kind of that positivity maybe you've experienced or that you've seen in some of the role models out there today.
Do you want me to keep it within sport or just in general?
No, I mean broaden it out in terms of the whole aperture.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like obviously I kind of my journey started after like London 2012, so I think I was swept away with the rest of the country by, like seeing all the Olympians and Paralympians in London 13 years ago, and that was kind of like what got me into it. I remember at the time it was a bit of a double-edged sword because they were marketed as superhumans,
Right.
and at the time it was like, oh, it's amazing, like these guys are superhuman, look what they can do, they've got disabilities. But then I think over time it kind of had the opposite effect, because people, like, at the end of the day, we're just normal people with disabilities, and like we're not superhumans. So I think it kind of had that double-edged sword of, there was people sat at home with disabilities that were like, oh, well, I can't do that. So it was really weird, but I found definitely watching London 2012 for me, and I think it's strange when you look at role models, because they kind of come in all shapes and sizes, what you'd expect, what you wouldn't expect. I think it's really hard like to kind of pin down a definition of what one is. I certainly have so many in my life. My strongest one is always, I will always say, my mum. It's been the strongest role model in my life. But yeah, I think it's so personal to everyone.
100%. Thank you. And Steve, how about yourself?
I don't know. I think from a personal level, I've been, I guess, very fortunate. My parents have always been very supportive. There's no nepotism in my career, so I don't think they really know what I do for a job, but they've always been supportive whilst never necessarily understanding everything that I do as a creative director. Lord knows I don't know sometimes, but but equally, one of the biggest influences in my life was a teacher, my art teacher, who I think if she hadn't have dragged me into her store cupboard and given me a right talking to, I don't know what I would have actually done, because my careers teacher told me I should join the army. And she saved my life, basically, because I don't know where I would have ended up other than that. And then throughout my career, I've been, I don't say fortunate, but I've my head of the degree course that I was on when I was doing my graphic design degree was just about tolerant enough of my, I would say, confidence, but he called it arrogance, to just give me enough rope to trust me to go and do the things I said that I really wanted to do. And then throughout my career, I think, like I also have a 19-year-old son now, and he and I have been talking about this topic. I think in a way, weirdly, because he and I were talking about it last night, and I was like, in a way, how you've turned out is kind of an inspiration to me, not because I take any credit for it, you are your own person, but I feel slightly relieved that I maybe haven't ruined his life yet, but but equally, how he's turning out as a human being makes me very proud. And that's, in a kind of inverted way, kind of a role model. Like, I need to keep doing what I do in the way I do it to make him proud. And yeah, I think there's loads of examples. We could probably have a 4-hour webinar just on that question, but I think there are great examples. Like, I try and consume as much culture and music as I can, because that's kind of what my job is fueled by. And there's an amazing artist who grew up in North London called Names Bliss, or one word. He's just got a new single. I'm not a promoter, but but his new single's got ADHD, and a lot of his music is actually talking about very real, very raw, very honest experiences of his life. There's another track called Last Week, which I don't know if it's a verbatim story, but it's a story about him interacting with a fan who then sadly goes on to, I think, get killed in a knife fight. But what he's talking about, when you mentioned ADHD earlier, bringing those kind of conversations to the forefront. I know it's kind of talked about more now, but normalizing it and him expressing how it affected him growing up, because he's a young man now, but back then it wasn't as talked about, and he was almost expelled, and struggled at school and had parents that didn't really recognise it as a symptom. And I think it's good that there are people like that have hopefully a wide age range following that can help younger people relate to that.
Yeah, love that. I think from hearing from you all, I think the notion that yes, we take our inspiration or our examples from lots of places and then place them in our own context, and at different times as well, we're going to need focus from maybe some of those people at different moments. And I think as we lead into some individual questions here and everything like that, I think what's been really striking to me about me growing up is that the different points in my life have meant that I've looked to different types of role model at different points, and it's often implicit and it's not there. But I think one of the things that really stuck with me, particularly as a teenager, was where someone placed trust and responsibility in you, and you knew that came at let's say a risk or a cost to them. And back to the roles of educators in that as well. I had a teacher who cast me in a school production, which might sound like nothing, but at the time I was just coming back to school having been excluded, and it was a time when actually that's quite a high risk strategy for him, because the cards were stacked against me making it, so to speak. And he really backed me and was absolutely committed to the fact that I was the right person to go and do that, and so on. So I think that notion that if you do find yourself in that position, actually you giving that young person or that person whom you're working with that responsibility and placing your trust in them and really doing that, I think gives a lot to them in terms of how they can level up and what they see in themselves as well, or the potential that they see in themselves. Great start to the conversation, guys, and we're already 25 minutes in, which has just blown my mind. So I'm going to switch into some individual questions quickly and then make sure we get around the group, because I know there's a lot of experience that you all bring from your lives. So Modi, we were talking before the call and everything about how you've transitioned through obviously youth work, but into where you see things today. And I think looking at, I guess, the shape of positive role modelling, what do you feel, or who or what do you think shapes that boy's sense of belief and belonging today, and how's that changed since you first entered youth work?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I think we've all sort of touched upon it. I think for me, it's that someone believing in you, so that sort of sense of self. And I think there was something about seeing yourselves reflected in those role models is also a key part in terms of who we sort of pick of role model as well. And I think there is something around showing up, going that extra mile a little bit. So you have the teacher that will take you to the cupboard to sort of shape you up and believe in you, someone giving that responsibility. I think there's all of those sort of elements around someone going beyond, or you perceiving they've gone beyond. So even staying later, or giving you advice, or giving you lunch when they need to. Even I can remember one time that one of the teachers, so just, my first job was through the schools. It was through the sports teachers who's then wrote my CV for me and actually made sure I turned up for the interview to do that job. So for me, it's those sort of components around consistency, believing in people, and stickability. I think those are the sort of things that were present there for me growing up and were important to me. And I would say those are still valid now. And I think we still need to be able to do those things now in terms of sort of role models as well. And that's what, for me, are sort of things that sort of sticks and are still valuable and maybe not change. I think now, as a society, we're moving, we're also online now, being remote, but nothing beats that sort of presence in a room, in a moment with those young people or those role models. So that human interaction is still a fundamental part of this. And I think for me, that's the sort of pivot where lots of young men are looking for inspiration online or people who they can't see. There's an element of that, but I think what we can't lose the element of people being present and being with you and showing up when no one else is expecting to show up. So yeah, I think for me, those are sort of things I think are important in this.
No, that's great. And do you feel you've seen things that are, I guess, you mentioned cooking as one of the things that you'd actively gone I feel this is something that I need to do to demonstrate a difference, if you like, or something exceptional. Are there unexpected things that you're seeing in some of the role models you're encountering that you'd like to see more of, as we throw ourselves in 5 years ahead or whatever? Are there any other components to that?
Yeah, I think there is some people, you mentioned earlier how you were sort of a surprise role model, you weren't expecting to be a role model. And I think for some communities, we have to be those role models. So for me, sort of growing up, I knew everywhere I went, I represented the community that I come from. Even now, as an adult, as sort of manager, as a leader in the organization, even knowing that actually my position, people see me, and that influences sort of the directions they take as well. So there's that sort of element around actually being conscious that you are a role model. And I think for me, more of us need to be aware of actually, we are all role models, regardless of if you're, is that brilliant, is an athlete or not, or everyday people as well, because what you do matters. And I think all of us sort of being more conscious of that, it's probably sort of vital components that I think we need to sort of shift as people, take the power back from where we're thinking role models have to be high profile people, those aspirations, they are. And I think there's value for those people, because we all talked about multiple sources about influences in terms of role model, but there is massive value for sort of everyday people doing everyday sort of mundane stuff, just the normal everyday stuff, showing up for you, believing in you, are massively important. And we need to celebrate that more, normalize that, and give everyday people the tools to actually understand actually you are a role model regardless. Where other communities were told from birth, every step you make, you are representing your whole community. But actually, as we widen that to, as a society, it's all our responsibility to be role models of each other, regardless of gender.
No, I think that's great. I think, and also I'll broaden it from the gender perspective. I think there's so many, themes or aspects of our lives that are, genuinely intersectional. And I think, from my experience, like, being among young people, they're very astute at spotting those things, and you can build lots of bridges and lots of bonds, provided you're very open to receiving those kind of connections and those signals from people, because they can be very unexpected. But actually, making sure that you're tuned to that, I think, is really, really important. And for yourself, Lee, I think we touched a little bit on some of the gender norms pieces there, and I know when we were talking as we were coming into this, I think you felt very passionately, and I think rightly so, that one of the pieces of research that I looked into was talking about, the importance of primary age, where gender norms are really kind of embedded and ingrained. But obviously the lens on that piece of research was, I guess, more from a negative standpoint, that there's a lot of risk there, and actually, that's a place that not enough is being done. But actually, in your experience and the work that you've been doing, it's a very positive counterpoint, I think, to that, where you and your teams are in there with primary education and doing a lot of work. I'd just love to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, my wife's a teacher, and I've seen schools. We work with over 100 schools, so we see what a fantastic job that teachers and the supporting staff do. And then I think what we can do, if we do it well, is go in and support that, and support it with initiatives. So, for example, we've got a Premier League Inspires programme that goes in and sends staff in, to those schools, and we can then talk about, gender equality, gender inequality, and what that means, and get active discussions going. And I think what we've seen is, to use an example, a lot of our organisations are founded in coaching originally, and now it's coaching, mentoring, education, health, employment. But if you take that coaching and mentoring part, then recently I've taken on a project around an under 16 programme to support the idea of a college programme beyond 16-year-olds. And what I found with working with young people was they didn't understand the opportunities that are out there for them. And I suppose, to a degree, then me acting as a role model, but working with a cohort of young people, young men in effect, and some of those young men actually come into the team as individuals, and then bonding them, and then a few of those individuals really needing some support, and seeing the feedback we've got from parents, and making one of those captain, and seeing the difference it's made, and getting the feedback. I think it's a case of, when we talk about it is proactive and role models that are present. What I've seen with those boys and what I've seen with my own son is they are immersed in their phones for so much of the time, and you can't see what they are actually absorbing. And so, in effect, what you've got to try and do is give them enough tools to make their own decisions, because you can't do that for them. And when then we talk about the wider communities, and where we work with some communities where there is real risk in communities, and we maybe provide that forum for those young people, then in effect we're filling a void there. And if we don't fill that void, then something else will. But what we do is we build trust, and then we bring other role models in. And some of those role models will actually be role models that have really been on a journey themselves and can tell their own story. And by us building trust and bringing in other people around it, then what we can do is those young people, you say, we just give them half an hour, just listen to what they've got to say. And it might be something around knife crime, or then actually they're willing, or to actually listen. And then when it comes to making their own decision in that critical point that is a sliding door moment, then we can possibly be part of the catalyst that gets the right decision. It's a long game we're playing with this, but if that's a much broader answer to the question than you originally asked. But I think that's how this system works. That we're playing a part in the solution. We're not the solution.
But I think that's kind of an interesting point there, right? Because I think there's a lot of things in life and in work and in even organisations like this where there's a hope or an expectation that things can be done quickly, or let's see the results. Or certainly in football, I think I don't know anything about football, but it seems if you lose more than 5 matches, you get binned.
Hopefully not in my case.
But that is a that is a long-term plan. It's not going to be an overnight success, or you're not going to see the results for that. It is a slow burning societal level change making approach, right? And sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't, but it takes years because it needs to, like you say, it needs to be a safe space. It needs to be a place that they feel that they can be honest in and have the trust, and then you can try to help provide that support, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Absolutely. One of the biggest changes we've seen is our workforce. That we're getting more and more female coaches and mentors coming through. And I think that's partly the growth of the women's game and fantastic role models coming through there. And it's also our own drive, to actually employ staff, like a trustees board. Modi has been part of that as well in terms of our recent, and yourself, Ian, in terms of recent recruitment. It is making an active decision that you can change profiles as well.
Right. No, super important. Zach, I'd love to bring you back in here as well, because we're using this term role model. Obviously, it's in the title of the talk. Who wouldn't? But I mean, just more from a cultural standpoint, it's coming up more and more every day. I don't think 5 years ago, I don't necessarily feel that there was necessarily that level of conversation about this, or this expectation that role model is coming up in the way that it is, or the importance that's being placed on it. And obviously, as you come up as an elite athlete, and through Paralympian sport, as it were, do you feel that that's that representation that that expectation about role model and allyship and so on, do you feel that that's something that is evolved and is more prevalent in your everyday thinking, your everyday life as well? And how do you prepare for that?
Yeah, I think I actually agree with Modi on that. Being a role model isn't necessarily about being high profile. It's not about what you do. But I think one thing I definitely did find is, after the Paralympics, like, I didn't see myself any differently. But I found the way people looked at me was differently, almost immediately. It was as soon as I had like a tag of Paralympian. Which you can look at in many ways. For me, I was like, well, it's good. Like, I can now, like, my voice now might carry more weight, or I now might, for good or for bad, like, be able to have an impact on someone's life. And I remember shortly after the Paralympics, there was an event. We all got invited to Buckingham Palace, all the Olympic and Paralympic medalists. And I remember when we got there, the Olympic athletes were dressed in suits, and the Paralympic athletes, we just had to wear tracksuits. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a bit odd. Like, this doesn't quite feel right. And then it later transpired there was also an after party at Fortnum & Mason, which the Olympians got invited to and the Paralympians didn't. So I remember thinking, oh, this is a bit strange. And then I tweeted about it. I was like, oh, what's going on here? And then the tweet ended up getting 1.6 million views, like basically everywhere across the country. And I remember thinking at the time, that was the first time where I was like, oh, this is the difference now. It's like, like I say, I really agree with Modi in that what you do, whether you're an elite athlete or not, it shouldn't push you to that place. It should be who you are, the impact you can have. But I think times we do live in a society where, for some reason, athletes, Olympians, Paralympians were almost put on this pedestal. And like I say, for good or for bad, I think if you use it in the right way, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I remember hearing you talk about that the inclusion conference where we were first introduced, and I thought, what was really powerful about that, and Jodie Alsey was also at that conference as well. But the fact that for such an important moment, an organisation where we credit with doing a great job in that moment really let you down and your colleagues and everybody, but the lens that is now put on the responsibility of those organizations to be the best of the version of themselves all of the time. I think we do need yourselves, everybody, to be conscious of calling that out. And we talked about the fact that in workplaces now as well.
I have a question for Zach. Can I follow up?
Yes, of course you can.
Zach, so that particular tweet example that you had, when you realised the impact and breadth of that your voice could carry, does that come with a slight bit of pressure now when you want to express a certain feeling? And second part of the question is, did you get a response from the people that made that decision not to invite you? Like, did you get a response from the people that should have responded to it properly?
Yeah, I'd say that was genuinely probably one of the most stressful weeks of my life, and it really shouldn't have been. I think because I'm not joking, I got shoved in front of every single news outlet you could think, and it was just me, and I wasn't from like the governing bodies. I wasn't getting supported. It was like genuinely the opposite. So I don't know. So I did end up meeting the CEO of Fortnum & Mason. I had a private meeting with him, which I thought was really good because it wasn't about, they weren't looking for clout. They weren't looking for getting the news.
Yeah.
It was literally just a discussion about what happened. And I think, again, it's like a systematic problem of society, to be honest, more than anything else. Like, why is the Olympic and Paralympic Association, why is it two governing bodies? Like, I think in our country, we have this like idea of, oh, we're amazing, everything's so equal. I think if you lift the curtain up, it's not. But yeah, we're kind of not allowed to talk about it.
Well, I hope you do, because I think with that influence that you obviously can clearly have, I would feel quite scared about tweeting anything because I've got quite a big mouth. And like, do you feel that pressure though? Like, because there are probably things you want to say that you don't, but you have this kind of platform now. So
I think I genuinely think you have to be yourself. I think if you're fake in any walk of life, you will get exposed. Like, you can't pretend to be someone you're not. And I think for me, whenever I say anything, not just publicly, just in my own life, I want whatever I say to have an impact. So I won't just say things for the sake of saying it. And that's kind of how I go through stuff like this. I think if like when you look at like the term activist, let's say, because someone said to me, "You're an activist," I was like, absolutely not. I'm just a person. But it's like if you say something every day, it becomes diluted and people don't listen. So I think I wouldn't say pressure, but I'd say you definitely have to pick your time and speak when it has the most impact.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Steve. And thank you, Zach.
I'll listen more, but I'll shut up.
No. But this is the point. It's nice we've got this conversation. I think one of the things I was looking to like connect that back to as well is workplaces and everything like that, because I think often in the workplace you might see something, or there might be a signal of something that makes you uncomfortable or you don't feel is right. And I know it's certainly been important for me to improve myself and be confident about being more outspoken and representing things in the right way, or structuring organizations in a way that is making the right signals and the right steps, rather than signals, to be inclusive and be properly representative and so on. I think I think bringing back to that kind of what else is out there as far as the places that we're looking. I know that Steve, we come from the creative industries. I think Zach's point there is equally true of so many of our own institutions as well. But keeping it in culture but branching out in sport. Just love to hear your reflections about the emerging popularity, say, of F1, Gen Z. We know that that's fastest growing sport in terms of viewership. We also know that 3 in 4 F1 fans now are women.
Yeah.
In that growth community. So just love to hear about your reflections on the role modelling perspective now.
Crikey. I think, like, first and foremost, it would be remiss of me not to mention the 8-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton. I said what I said 8 times. I think the work that he has done, and a point that Modi and Zach mentioned triggered something else I wanted to add. It would be very easy for someone with Sir Lewis Hamilton's name and platform as global and as huge as it is, to insert himself a lot into the things that he's doing. But it strikes me as a fan from the outside, I sadly don't know him, but the Hamilton Commission that they released in 2019, which laid out a very clear, it was a very in-depth report, about 98 pages, but they had a 10-step plan of how they could improve, how they could advocate for and support and set up funds to improve, getting the message out there, getting more students from, different backgrounds, i.e. not wealthy necessarily, to help Black students find engineering and all of the other kind of areas that go into motorsport. Off the back of that, and I don't know whether this happened, Mission 44 is the foundation that he then set up, which is, getting quite a huge team now together, working globally at all the races that he goes to, but he doesn't insert himself. Yes, they promote, and Mission 44's, socials have some of him in there, but actually what they do very well is promote the people that work with Mission 44, the students that they're talking to. Last race was in Brazil. He's there, and he's in the shot, but it's not him taking front and center stage. It's him pushing. I think there was I forget her name. There's a woman that used to be that worked for Petronas when he was at Mercedes. He elected for her to come onto one of the podiums to collect a trophy. She's now heavily involved in Mission 44, and he hands his platform over to those people. And I think that old saying about, in order to be, you've got to see it, is true. And I say it as a person that's obviously white and probably comes from a privileged background compared to many other people. But when you look at, people like the work that Lewis has done and started with Mission 44 and how that's been carried on, to see it, and representation is also about showing the opportunity. Yes, I'm sure there are plenty of kids of all different backgrounds and skin colours who are seeing Lewis and going, oh, maybe I could do that. The sad truth is there's only 24 currently next year racing drivers in Formula 1, but that's not the point. It's showing the opportunity, and that's what Mission 44 does. And I think from there all the way down, like you're saying, the growth in female sports fans. Let's not talk about Sky Sports Halo, but in terms of, you talk about tone deaf.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I nearly wrote a book years ago called Boardroom Minutes, and it's BORED, because it was all I wanted to write a narrative of some of the worst ideas I think that have been made, and write what I think might have been the script in the boardroom. And I would love to know who came up with that decision. But
can you just explain for the audience?
Sorry, yeah. So Sky Sports decided that they wanted to create a TikTok channel not just, but to celebrate females in sport, and they called it Sky Sports Little Sis. Which what I loved about it the most was not nonsense that they posted, but was this. I think they launched it last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and by Sunday they'd shut it down and put a statement out. Why? Because I saw hundreds, and I've saved loads of them in my TikTok. But there was literally thousands of female fans rightly calling them out, and it was just tone deaf. But I think in Formula One, I'm the only person in my family that watches Formula One, so I've done it in isolation for years. I rarely watch it live, but since I was working with Lucky Sons 3 or 4 years ago, I've embedded myself in the community, and I think there are great content creators that are doing a great job of being, I don't know if you call them role models, but certainly influential in that the way that they turn up. There's a great content creator called Cameron. It used to be Cameron F1, but is now called Cameron CC because Liberty Media. But he is relentless, but he's like an encyclopedia about Formula One. He does 1 or 2 shows a day on his YouTube channel. He does other series. He does live watch-alongs. He's very articulate. He's a family man. I know that because I know him a little bit. But there's Quick Stop F1, which I think at the time when they started in 2021 were the self-proclaimed first Black Formula One fan podcast. So it's Nasha and Tandy. Just an awesome pairing. They're not a couple, but they're just like so different, but they just bring such a different energy and voice. And I think they've grown slowly, but they've got quite a good audience. They were the first podcast, I think, from Formula One that I knew of that were doing live watch-alongs in a real life setting. So their community, they would sell out like pubs and the cinemas. The one that I went to, I got to know quite a few of the people that turned up. There was a girl who travelled all the way from Sheffield on her own, finishing her masters, came all the way from Sheffield to London just to go to that on her own, and then went home again. Right. And as Nasha said, I think, or Candy at the time, that's what this community is. It's a safe space for people who just love Formula One. So influences in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there are lots of those. I've only mentioned a few, but there's lots of those because sadly, as I'm sure everyone here knows, in sport, there's also toxicity. There's tribalism. There's my team versus your team. And sport is nothing if they haven't got fans. You need jeopardy. You need rivalry, you need entertainment, and that brings fans, and that's the thumping heartbeat of any sport. So you have to kind of listen to them, serve them what they want, but then, within that fan community, I've seen it since Drive to Survive, there's definitely more tribal mentality in a minority of the fans.
Right. I think what you've really helped expand the conversation to there as well, Stephen, to what Zach was saying as well, is the notion that you've got to be able to see and represent, and there's a role modeling, there's a figureheading there. There's also making sure the timing's right, the context is right, you're doing it appropriately and using those platforms. Then you're also making space, or you're creating spaces where those things need to exist. And you mentioned that Brian there who's got that wrong. Yeah. And I think that's something that's really important as we think about how we really get this to be an everyday thing that we're considering thoroughly, fully, including and taking everyone on that journey with us. I'm going to pause very momentarily. We've got 10 minutes left on the call. I can't see the chat, but at this point I'm going to ask Louise, if you're there, if you can just pop back up and let me know if you've had any questions in the chat, just so we can use the remaining time.
And if we haven't, let's make them up and make it sound like
exactly.
Don't worry, we've had a question from Gareth Jardine. I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name incorrectly there. Gareth is head of PE at a non-selective state school based in Kennington, and he's asked, there's 2 questions here really. So first is, what do you think the role is of male teachers in framing what masculinity should look like for pupils within schools? And secondly, what role do you think sport plays in framing masculinity? He's also said, for context, this could relate to gender norms and breaking down stereotypes.
Okay, so for me to tackle the question, I'm probably going to tackle the sports one first, if that's helpful, given I'm the least sports or athlete in the room. But I think there's something around, as a parent, I put my kids through team sports for the transferable skills that comes from sports. So, the ability to sort of, team working, ability to winning, losing together, all of those sort of emotional turmoils you go through as sort of team sports. I think there's an element that's important in sort of putting young people through that, because I think you get transferable skills. So for me, when I put my children through that, not because I'm expecting them to be, professional athletes, but I think there's something around what you learn from that sort of, the skills you pick up in those spaces, I think are important, and the transferable skills, you can apply it to multiple realms in your life. And the first question was around masculinity. I think it's a really interesting conversation we're having around masculinity. And I think, maybe just for myself, when we're thinking about the current conversation around sort of toxicity and masculinity, we're thinking about, I envisage that conversation is talking about a particular type of boys. For me, when I'm thinking about the current conversations around talking about sort of white boys and what's happening to sort of white boys at the moment. And I think that's a very interesting conversation when we sort of think about, actually, I grew up with lots of, white males around me, and we all had the same similar role models. We all looked at sort of Linford Christie, we all looked at Ian Wright, we all looked at all these sporting people, but the conversation now sort of talks about, actually, those white boys being left behind. And I think, I'm not sure how true that is from my experience. I think, actually, we all pick role models from different walks of life. We talked about Lewis Hamilton, we talked about Zach on the call right now. We don't necessarily break it down in terms of, representation matters. I think there's key, definitely important in that, but we pick role models from lots of different walks of life. And I think the current conversation is shifting into a space where it's massively negative, because there is a loss, and we need to hear that, and we need to address that. And I think how we address it is everyday people. So PE teachers have got a role to play in that. I think everyday, I talked about before, in terms of normalizing that all males have a responsibility to be role models, regardless if you want it or not. What you do matters. So how you interact with each other matters. Yesterday I was driving, it was a road rage incident I was seeing between two men, and I'm like, actually, there's people watching that. How you hold yourself in public matters. And I think there's a something shift that we have to have culturally in conversation in terms of, actually, as men, we've got a responsibility to play. It's okay to show emotion. It's okay to cry. I cry all the time, and I tell people that I cry all the time. People find, I'm 6'1", quite a big man. What you cry? Yeah, I'm crying. It's okay, and I'm scared of spiders. It's sort of normalizing. It's normalizing those things that we can't talk about. And I think for me, that's what matters. And I think for me, the role, if I understood the question around, actually, what do PE teachers? I think I'd say, yeah, PE teachers have a massive role to play in that. I think everyday men in every walks of life, real people, have a role to play in that as well. It's shifting that dial, because I think there's smaller voices who are taking over that conversation, when actually it's everyday people, from cleaners. It's just people you see, and we need to take a collective responsibility.
I was just going to add to that. I think I'm just starting on my own coaching journey and doing, starting my FA badges and stuff like that. By the way, I come from a rugby background, so putting a ball at my feet is an absolute catastrophe. But what I found really helpful in much of the training materials now is how you think about bringing young people into your conversation, even the level at which you do that. So starting with getting their perspectives, getting their views and everything like that. And actually, there's, I think, some really good training methods, and I'm sure there are in schools as well. But like everything, we all have to practice that stuff, right? And remind ourselves to do it. And I think what's really great about the coaching community that I'm working with at the moment is we hold each other accountable for that. And I know from a safeguarding perspective, coming into the trust, it's very much in our everyday, literally everyday conversation for you. But when we meet as a board and hear about the safeguarding reports, it's also the positive reports about what's been going on, not just the small number of safeguarding issues which do occur, which naturally would occur in terms of what might be going on when you're dealing with 12,000 sessions a year, right? And I think what's amazing for me in all of that is just hearing about how, whether it's coaches, whether it's project coordinators, whatever they might be, how they engage with people and respect young people in a way that actually builds conversation and builds bridges with them. And I think a lot of that is now being well, if you like, built into systems and processes that I think are trainable and are helping us all get better at that. Louise, have we got time for one more before we have to conclude?
We have. So we've had another question that says, you would often hear retired players say today's athletes are soft and entitled, and you'll hear younger athletes say that former players don't understand mental health or the new pressures. Where's the real disconnect happening in the passing down of manhood through sport, and how can we fix it?
Zach, can we ask you that quickly, if that's all right, just to start with, and then maybe bring it back to you?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I can give you an answer, but I can tell you a story. Literally, before I walked out into the stadium for the final in Paris, I literally cried. I'd literally finished my warm up, and I just stood there and I was like crying. It was literally 20 minutes before the race, and I was like, honestly, every single sports psychologist would tell me this is horrific for performance. But no, I don't know. I don't know if it's just society as it's changed with social media and stuff, and I think we're now subjected to see things that we wouldn't used to, like our brain chemistry is just different now. So I think it's more of a question of society's mental health rather than just specifically sport. I think high pressure environments, whether it's sport or work, would probably just enhance that.
I think there's a lot of work being done to remove the stigma around mental health, and the fact that when you say, well, people are soft, actually in sport sometimes that's perceived as weakness, and that's one thing in sport, particularly at high level sport, that maybe people have to portray themselves in a certain way at a certain point in time. But I think it's only for the good, and I think the game on a wider basis, if you look at what the recent Premier League initiatives around suicide awareness, that is proactive, and that can only be a good thing, for society in general. And the fact that, sort of relating that to the previous question about masculinity as well, that's to do with imagery to a degree and modeling of behavior. And actually what I'm seeing through our staff, and I saw it again last night and I see it every single day, is that it's exactly what you said. It's interacting with each other and understanding, and then that question of, well, can you learn or can you teach empathy? And I think you genuinely can if you keep, if it's consistent, and if role models, or not even role models, but if communities are consistent, why can't that happen, that we understand each other and we understand each other in a better way, and then media supports that whole idea of we can be better as a community together.
I'm gonna add one last thing while we've got time. I'm gonna add in our friend, sadly departed, Simon Gill's saying, because there's a lot of prickly people in the creative industry. Most of them are creatives, and the best ones I ever worked with were the ones that had empathy. And he always said, harder to work, kinder to people. It's a motto that's stuck.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that brings us to a nice conclusion. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Zach. I think a lot of people have taken a lot away from that, particularly Zach, speak when you can have the most impact. I think you made a really good point there. I'm sure you could have carried on talking all afternoon, but I think it's been really valuable. Thank you to everyone for attending, and have a brilliant rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Hope you haven't ruined your training, Zach.